I was carrying papers in Bowling Green. Actually, that afternoon, I had laid down across the bed and took a nap. And when I woke up, it was on the radio. And it was kind of a shock. And that night, the Park City Daily News put up the first extra I guess they ever put out. I had a paper route that went down Main Street, down Church Street to the river, and back up Portage Railroad. And this was about 10, 11 o'clock at night. We sold extras. They put guards on all the bridges, all the substations. The bridge at Nashville, and all those bridges were covered with like chicken wire, where you couldn't throw anything over with a guard on each end. Well, I was a senior in high school and was thinking about a trade school. And I went down to the Navy recruiter, I guess it was in March, to ask for a delayed enlistment. And he said, no, if you sign up, you leave today. And I said, no, I'll wait till I get out of high school. So after high school, I worked on a construction job in Bowling Green for a couple of months. In July, I was called up by the draft board. I took a bus load. I was to Evansville for a physical. And after the physical, I walked up to the last guy in the line, and he said, well, sailor, what branch of the service did you want to be in? Well, in the meantime, I changed my mind. I wanted to be in the Army. And so I said, no. I said, put me in the Army. And he said, get on out here. Well, Charlie Miles was right behind me. And when he walked up, he said, soldier, what branch of the service did you want to be in? He said, the Navy. So I went back and I said, he wants the Navy, I want the Army, switches. And of course I got balled out. And we had 7 days to go home, I guess, and get things in order, but a 19-year-old didn't have anything to get in order. Oh, I took the oath on my birthday, the 22nd of July. I went to boot camp for 8 weeks. Come home on a 7-day leave. Went back to the lakes. I can't remember whether that was there 1 or 2 days. But we left. It was a rainy night. I remember that. It was just up 10, 11, 12 o'clock. We loaded up a troop train and headed west, and the shades were pulled. When we left up until sometime the next day, we weren't allowed to tell where, mail anything or talk to anybody, supposedly. It was 5 days and 4 nights to California. Went to Shoemaker, which I guess was a little community, probably 40 miles from San Francisco. It was a new Navy camp. It was being built where they were bringing in recruits right out of boot camp. Was there about 3 days, and they loaded 3 of us on a pickup truck with all of our gear and took us into Alameda, California. And when I saw the ship, I knew that it was going to be a minesweeper. The ship was about 220 feet long and 39 feet wide. It was either 2 semi-trailers or 2 boxcars and 1 semi. I guess it was 2 semis and a boxcar. We stowed our gear. They fed us. This was along about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then put us in a working party. And we loaded beans and rice. It seemed to me like for hours, and I wondered what we were going to do with that much beans and rice for that small of a ship. We had 120 men, including officers, on it. I found out what the beans and rice was when we run out of fresh stores.
My daddy was a 100% disabled veteran from World War I. He was drafted when he was about 29 years old, and went up to Camp Zachariah Taylor in Louisville, and he was in charge of a bunch of horses. There was about 250 people, and it's an interesting story. I don't know whether you got time for it or not.
Yeah, tell us.
But they took care of 6,000 head of horses, trained them, shot them, groomed them and so forth. And then I don't think the United States got into that war much fighting until 1917. I'm not sure
Yeah,
you'll
that's right.
know about
That's right.
that.
Yeah.
But in 1917, but in the early part of 1918, they took a trainload of horses to New Jersey to put them on a ship to take them to France, because they used a lot of them, back then to pull artillery with, and they used horses, and they had some mules there at Camp Zachariah Taylor, but Daddy was a farmer, and that's how he got that assignment, what he got in. And I've got a picture of him down at the museum now. But what I was telling you, they took these horses a trainload of them to New Jersey and backed into the docks, and they'd unload a carload of them. Then they'd back up the car and unload the car. Of course, they were hesitant. The horses was kind of scared, being in a strange area like that. And they put the things on top of the ship, not in the hold. They were too nervous, horses to put down in a hold. And they had the ship designed and fences and barriers around where they put them out on the deck, and that's the way they shipped them to France. But anyway, it was raining, and he had an old poncho over his head. And these horses was hesitant to go down in there, and he just hollered, said, "Get in there," and slapped his poncho like one of them things, wheeled around and kicked him right there in the right hip and broke his hip bone in two. By the time he got back, there was troops coming back from Europe all the time, putting them on a train there in New Jersey, New York, and taking them on home. By the time he got back from there back to Camp Zachariah Taylor, blood poison had set in, and they just didn't have the technology to get his bone back together. And as a result, his leg was stiff from his hip always to his knee. He couldn't bend it all. This one bone just fused itself together is what it did. And his right foot set at about a 45-degree angle. So he couldn't do anything all of his life, but he drew 100% disability. He was 100% disabled as a result of that. But I thought it was right interesting when I remember him talking about putting them horses out on the deck of that ship.
That's pretty good.
And took them to France. And apparently, when the United States got through with them over in World War II, they left all those horses over there.
Yeah.
And you might know about Jesse now. They say that horse meat is a delicacy over there.
Oh yeah, they do eat horse meat and lots
So
of.
they ate the horses. One more little thing about that. A doctor friend of mine was in Germany, Dr. Guthrie from Franklin, Tennessee. He's dead now. He was a captain over there, and he got the GP and a sergeant and went back to the back to get some medicine to bring back up front the next day. He was captured there at Bastogne. And there was the reason I knew about this because he had this German saddle down at his house hanging up. Well, there was two horses laying beside the road dead and a big artillery piece all over in the ditch. And he told the sergeant, "Stop, stop, stop." And he said, "Captain, don't do that." I said, they're booby-trapped them things. They'll blow you to kingdom come. No. So he got off and took that saddle off that horse. And I saw it. He had it in Franklin, Tennessee. When he died, I guess it's still down in someplace. But then the next morning when they came back, they went back up to the front. They went by the same location, and the artillery piece was still laying there, and both horses were gone. So evidently, and that was at the Battle of Bastogne. They was short of food. So, but my guess is they pulled those horses into town and ate them, skinned and ate them, because they was short of food. And in 1941, I remember 1941 Sunday afternoon, December the 7th. We were out on Cleveland Avenue. I had a date with a girl out there, and we went out to listen to the big band program. See, there was no television back then. Not everybody had a radio, I don't suppose, but Mr. Daugherty had a radio, so we went out to listen to the radio program at 1 o'clock, big band program. And sometime during that program, they broke in and made the announcement that Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. And we got to talking about it. Of course, we continued to listen to the program, Didn't excite us, as I remember, too much. But then we got to talking about trying to find out where Pearl Harbor was. We didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. We knew where the Hawaiian Islands were, but we didn't know where
Didn't know Pearl Harbor was part of them, did you?
No. So, but anyway, that was in December. We were looking forward to getting out of Christmas. So the next day was Monday was December the 8th, and then we assembled up at the old high school, down the auditorium, all the high school did. And up on the stage was a table up there with a little radio on it. Coach Camp was up there and other teachers and the principal was up there. And we waited till President Franklin Delano Roosevelt got on the radio and made this speech and declared war on Japan. And then when we heard that speech, it kind of woke us up. I mean, we went out there. We got to thinking, man, we're in war. So anyway, we went up and checked the National Geographic and found out where Pearl Harbor was. But then, that was in December 7th, 1941. So then we went home for Christmas, of course, and went over into 1942. And Coach Camp there, he had what he thought was a winning football team, and he did have a winning football team. And we were all ready to go right into the service right then. But he said, well, why don't you wait? Why don't you wait till you get your high school diploma and so forth? Well, to make a long story short, we did wait, and the football team won. And then we were undefeated, untied during 1942 and won the state championship. And then as a result of that, we played in that All-Star game in Lexington on December 5th, 1942. That was about almost a year into the war. But in that 1 year's time, it was just remarkable what had taken place. The people in this country got so enthused and so involved and so mad and just, it was just a miraculous thing. They tore Pearl Harbor all to pieces. I mean, they just tore that thing from one end to the other. And 6 months later, they had all them ships out there repaired, and that thing was running again within a 6-month period of time. Evidently, they got everybody in the world that knew how to weld and sent them to Pearl Harbor. And then they got behind everything. And of course, in the meantime, the rationing started about that time too. Things started getting. But anyway, that's where we were. In high school.
Then you were a junior when the Pearl Harbor was attacked. Is that right?
All right. Let's see. In 41, I was a junior in 1941. Yeah, in 1941.
So you were scheduled to graduate in 43 then.
Mm-hmm.
Did you go ahead and did you graduate?
Yeah, and in the meantime, at that particular time there was a shortage of pilots, a real serious shortage of pilots. But you had to have a high school diploma in order to get into the program, to the cadet program, so you to become a pilot, because you were going to become an officer when you got your wings. And so we went ahead and graduated, and Joe Leach up here, and me and Fred Mohawk Wheeler, we called him Mohawk Wheeler. We all three got on the train, went out, and went into the Air Force, and took a cadet flying training program. And I got my wings on December the 14th, 1944, up here at Seymour, Indiana, Freeman Field in Seymour, Indiana. And so I graduated. I never did have any problems flying. The ground grades wasn't the greatest in the world, but I had much trouble flying.
Before the war began, I had just come out of the CC camp over that Mammoth Cave. My dad told me that he wanted, he asked me if I'd do my best to finish high school. That was before we left Bowling Green. And I told him yes. He said, well, I didn't finish school before he lived in Tennessee, you know, and so I didn't finish school, and said I said I was going to try to get all of y'all to finish school. And I promised him I would, and I meant to. But when I came up here, when he brought us up here, Mama didn't come. Well, back then you didn't ask your parents any questions. You just I just waited to see what was going to happen. I went to school. I quit school and signed up for the CC camp in the fall of the year. That fall of 19 and September 19 and 38. I went up to the hotel one day. This lady, I think her name was Mrs. Bryant, and she sent me a card and told me that I'd be going to CC camp in September. And this was about in June or July. So I went up there, and she said, "Well, you'll be leaving in September. I'll send you a notice." And she said, "But I just want to kind of get your brief for it." And she said, "Now, have your parents consented for you to go?" I said, "No, ma'am." I said, "It's just my daddy up here." And I said, "I'm going to talk to him. I'm going up to talk to him about it today." And when I left her, I went up there. My dad was back in the kitchen. I just went to the kitchen door, and saw he wasn't. I said, "Daddy, you took their business?" He said, "No." And so I said, "Can I talk to you?" He said, "Yeah, I'll be out in a few minutes." So he came out, and I just been to the bank up there. And every time I go to that bank, financial bank, I have some of the most profound memories of that place that you ever thought of.
Reminds you of your dad, doesn't it?
Yes, and all the experiences I had up there. I worked up there 2 years, and but he came out, and I said, "I've got something I want to tell you." And I told about me signing up for the CC camp. I said, "Some of the boys over here, they've told me about it, And I said, I was 16 then. I said, "Daddy," I said, if I had my brother and 2 sisters, I said, if you let me go, I'll be one less mouth that you'll have to feed." And I said, "Now, Mama's not here." And I said, "That really changes things with me." And I said, and I was making my appeal to him in such a way that I was hoping he wouldn't say no. I said, "Now, I'm just 28 miles from here," and I said, "I might be able to get home once, twice a month, and depending upon how things go." And so after I talked to him, he dropped his head and thought for about a few seconds. He raised his head. He said, "Junior," said, "You sure this is what you want to do?" I said, "Yes, Daddy." I said, I want to go out and make me a life for myself now." And I said, "What the fellas said, I can learn lots over there." The fellas they had a crew that went out and built field dams to slow the soil from washing away, and they worked on the roads and worked in the trees, and they had a rock quarry over there that made their own rock, to maintain the roads and so forth, and just did a lot of good things. And of course, I was young, and we used to live at that little place called Sunnyside down below Oakland, where that bridge goes over the railroad down there. Well, I was living with my grandparents when they built that bridge, and I was about 8 or 9 years old.
How long were you in the CCC?
2 years.
2 years.
I stayed in there. Went in September 38 and came out September 48. 40. And then I got out, and my dad had told me that they needed a wait up there. They had three waiters up there, and one of the waiters had just gone to Louisville. He had a brother down here, and his brother had been working up at Brown's Hotel,
Mm-hmm.
and he said he had a job for him, and so he left
Right.
here.
What do you remember what you were doing when you heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Oh yes, I was standing in the lobby that morning when President Roosevelt declared war on Japan. Had the radio going,
Mm-hmm.
and I was standing in the lobby. I happened to be out there because what I did, I waited on the table 18 months before I went to service, and so I was out there for I don't know why I was out there, but I was standing there talking to one of the guests when they announced that they declared a war on.
Do you remember what you were doing when you heard about the attack itself on
No,
Sunday?
no,
You don't remember
No, no, on a Sunday.
Well, that's all right.
Yeah.
But you do remember hearing them say that they declared war on Japan.
Oh yes, I
Yeah.
heard President.
How soon after that did you go into the service?
Well, that was in 41.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my wife and I had just married October the 4th in 41. She taught school down here at Bunch for about 37 years. I guess you know
I
that.
remember it. Yes.
And I went into the service in about July. It was about July
42.
of 42. When we left here, there was 2 bus loads of us left here on the square. And we went to Louisville, and we got on the train. And we went to Indianapolis. And we got off the train. I didn't know where we were. But, you know, that's a fort there.
Mhm.
I can't even think
I
of
can't.
Fort Benjamin Harrison. I can't remember like I used to. But Fort Benjamin Harrison, I'd heard about Fort Benjamin Harrison for a long time. And so, it looked like I'm just new, just a rook and everything, but the place looked so vast. But they processed us. We stayed around there for about 2 weeks. They processed us, and they sent a bunch of boys. I guess those boys, since then, after we got back home, some of the fellows told me that they sent some to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and some one, two, three of the boys got sent to that camp. You got sent to the same camp? No. There's another camp up there near Indianapolis. They got sent to that camp. And then some others, they sent them to Texas. Lord, they sent them all over the place. And some of the boys from here, the colored boys, they sent some of those fellows to 5 or 6 different places, just out of the way places, you know.
Now, you just mentioned the fact that some of the black soldiers were sent. Were all of the 2 bus loads that left here black?
No.
So it was
mixed.
Even though the services were segregated at that time.
Yeah.
At the time of the induction, you went off together.
Yeah, yes, sure did. And so after they processed us, they sent a bunch of us, put us on a train, and we went to Henderson. And of course the train when it stopped, it was on the post, you know.
Mm-hmm.
and so we got off. I didn't know where in the world I was, and so they carried us, and it was a new camp too, and they carried us at a certain place, and we got off, and then they assigned us to our barracks. But
Now, by that time, the unit had become segregated. By that time, were you in an all-black unit?
yes, right. And when we went to be examined, we went to Louisville to the Army to be examined 2 weeks before we went in for good. 14 days. They said, we give you 14 days to set your house in order. They make a big to-do out of that, joking, But what I started to tell you, this is a significant factor in my life. I knew they were going to get me, and Mr. Jones told me. See, I was just at the time I was just 20. My wife and I married. Well, I was 21, going on 22. But I was inspired. I thought about this, and it really kind of interfered with me, But I tried to be reasonable minded by things that come up, that might tend to disturb, My people told me not to be so anxious in life for something that wasn't as important as I thought it was. Well, of course, with the war coming on after we married, I was thinking that in fact, I talked to my wife about it, and when I told her I was going to talk to Mr. Jones about letting me go, even though we'd just been married about a year. I felt like if I get him to let me go on, and I put it like this, and let me do what little I can do to get this war over, we'd come back home and live in peace. And I was really specifically thinking about my wife, where we could live in peace together and have a nice, nice marriage and everything, and enjoy each other. Well, it worked out like that. She didn't want me to go, of course, and I didn't want to go, but I'll always believe that this was the Lord that gave me that revelation to go on, or to go up and talk to Mr. Jones. And I talked to him about if I could go right away. He said, well, Fred, says they were taking fellas in their 30s and 40s then too. And he said, Fred, says, about the only way I could take you now is if when the quarter comes up, or when a particular quarter comes up, and someone cannot go, I can take it for one reason or another. I can use you to fill in for them, And I don't know how true it is, but there's a black fellow around here. He was a cook at a restaurant down here on the corner, on Lewis Street. And of course, I guess he was an alcoholic. They said he'd been drinking for years. And when I got back, they told me that he could have been faking. Some of the fellas, I heard about some of the fellas on the time they were supposed to go to be examined, they'd eat soap and,
Yeah, I've heard some strange things too.
Yes, but I was taught from a child, even in school, I was taught to honor and be faithful to our nation, and officers and things, and the system, I was taught to respect them, and just as much as we respect our homes, you know, and our community. I was taught to do that, you know. And of course, but the fact that I got to go, and I like 11 days being in there 4 years. I didn't think, but I told her I was going to be, I was coming back. I told her, and she said, how do you know? Well, see, I couldn't boast about the Lord like I can now. But I told her that I was coming back. I said, I have confidence in the Lord going to let me come back. And I believe that too.
I entered the Navy on October 24th, 1940.
What had you been doing before you went into the Navy?
I was an expert paint salesman.
No.
Well, no, before you went into the Navy.
C.
CCCs?
Where were you in the
Did you
CCC?
hear of those?
Yeah.
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 Did you ever hear of CCCs?
I hadn't heard of them. What?
Civilian Conservation Corps.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
We had almost like a division in the Army, except we weren't combat or anything. But we had chores of going out into the neighborhood and building overshots and streams for irrigation.
Oh, okay.
Did a lot of riprap work.
Now, did you have to do stuff like you know how if a flood were occurring or something like that, did you have to put sandbags and make, you know, was it just
No.
environment you worked with?
I was in Utah. We didn't flood there.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is a good point.
What prompted you to join the Navy?
Well, 2 or 3 things, but the main reason was that
It's under the rock.
winds of war was blowing pretty strong by then. This was about almost a year before the war started. And I decided I didn't want to be a soldier in a trench and live in mud all the time. Because I had a buddy that joined the Navy just ahead of me, and he said, as long as you have a bed, it's dry. But if you don't have a bed, it's pretty wet. So that's what prompted me to take the Navy. I thought I'd like that better than a mud hole.
So you had been in the Navy for over a year when the attack on Pearl Harbor occurred. From October of 40
October 40,
to December of 41. That's over a year that you'd been in the service. Where were you when you heard of the attack on Pearl Harbor?
in the Philippine Islands, Manila Bay, and someone woke me up. Well, they woke us all up with the general alarm system that they had, and ordered us to man our battle stations. So we spent all that day at battle stations, and a nice little joke on us is during that day, way up high was a silvery looking object, and we thought it was a plane, because they are, a lot of them, silvery looking. And we opened fire on the doggone thing. After a while, the captain came out and ordered us to cease fire. He says, "You're firing at Venus."
The planet. That was gonna be tough to get, wasn't it?
I thought, yeah, that'd be a hard one to hit.
What ship were you on at that time?
At that time, I was on the oil tanker Trinity over on the left there. USS Trinity.
David, you can get a picture of that later. That was the ship it served on.
And
Well, when they heard about the attack, what did the ship do? Did you leave the Philippines at that time?
we spent all that first day loading supplies and whatever we needed, and we left there that night at midnight. And we hadn't any more than left till they took over the Philippine Islands. The next day,
Yeah, they moved in and started fighting.
and we headed for Australia, and we got down there, we felt a little bit safer, but they later hit part of it too. Port Darwin. they bombed it with planes. But then we started hauling oil from the Persian Gulf. We were the first U.S. Navy ship to ever enter the Persian Gulf. And we had to go up a river about 50 miles to a place called Basra, Iraq, and get our fuel. And we'd come back out and get into coves and hiding places like that, and the rest of the fleet would come in 1x1 or 2x2 and fuel up from us. And they'd head back out into battle. These were the fighting ships, cruisers and battleships, and occasionally a submarine, not very often a submarine, but occasionally. And ships of that sort, heavy cruisers, light cruisers. You ever hear of a Marblehead cruiser?
Mm-hmm.
It was a light cruiser, and it was with our force, and one of our escorts temporarily. And it fueled up one day, and the Houston filled up right after that. And the next day they were both sunk in the Celebes Sea in a battle with Japanese battleships.
Just let me ask you a couple questions, if that's all right.
Yeah,
Like,
question.
what about like, so you obviously you had a fleet with you. It wasn't just the Trinity, right? So you had a couple of people around you all the time, or a couple of other ships that would be with you.
Oh, we had sometimes we were in one convoy with 600 ships.
That's amazing to
And
me.
I can tell you, while we're mentioning that, we were retaking the islands in the South Pacific one by one that they had taken from us. And we'd worked our way back through Inuitok and the Admiralty Islands and on back to the Philippines, where I was when
Where you started, right?
when the war started. But it was ironic that about 2 weeks before they headed for the Philippines, I became ill and had to go to the hospital. We had base hospitals on all these islands. They weren't like a modern one, but they had doctors and they could treat us. And we would be at some places like that for quite a while, and we might move on to another area.
Now, did you feel particular ships, like were there, like when you said those two that got sunk, were they ones that you had, given them gas and oil before?
Yeah.
So you knew
They-
the people on those ships
The
then?
two of them, one of them I knew a guy that was a distant nephew actually, and he came aboard our ship the day before because he knew I was on there, and we had a little visit. But
You're talking about going to Iraq to pick up petroleum. How long did the trip take? Now you were moving from Australia to the Gulf. How long did that trip take?
30 days each way.
And for the most of that trip, you were not escorted through the Indian Ocean. There wasn't an escort with you. Is that correct?
True. We had escorts for 2 days out of a port of destroyers and cruisers and such ships that could fight.
There weren't that many hostile ships in the Indian Ocean, Japanese ships.
We were safe 2 days out until we got 2 days, within 2 days of our destination. We were in pretty safe waters. No Japanese ship or submarine had ever been picked up in those waters.
That's in a tribute to the U.S. Navy, I reckon, and I guess some of the British Navy
Well,
too.
yeah, and the Japanese were concentrating their efforts in the Western Pacific. They had to. That's where their interests were primarily, so they didn't spread themselves that thin by putting
people
ships in that area.
Good thing
You know,
for us.
What other ship did you serve on besides the Trinity?
The Gamber Bay, that carrier there, the big picture. It was a small carrier. It was called a CVE, which was Carrier Escort. That's what that meant.
I read somewhere that new recruits would sometime ask what CVE stood for, and they would tell them it meant combustible, vulnerable, and expendable.
Well, that's about the truth.
Those were called baby flat tops. There were 50 of those that were commissioned. Henry Kaiser built those as escort carriers, and they were to kind of fill the vacuum that land-based planes couldn't cover
Yes,
in the middle of the ocean, and that's what they were built for.
exactly.
And they were, I guess all those adjectives were correct. They were combustible, vulnerable, and expendable.
Did you learn all that from me?
Some of it I learned from you. When did you begin your service on the Gamber Bay?
Oh, I'll have to think a little bit about that. I came back from duty on the Trinity from Brisbane, Australia, landed in San Francisco, and they sent us to a rest camp that was once owned by a fellow named Jack London. I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he was a
The writer?
The writer?
writer.
Hmm.
And we were sent there for 2 weeks, what they call rest and recreation.
Huh.
That is, that people had been overseas over a year. Well, I'd been there 3 solid years that first shift, and I was glad to get back there. We went up to this rest home and ate like kings, could go into town anytime we wanted to. Usually the girls from town would drive up around there and wait for someone to come out and they'd offer them a ride into town. It was great. And they were real good to us. So,
When you were on that ship, you were in the initial crew, weren't you? When it was brand new?
the Gamber Bay,
Mhm.
yeah. We commissioned it in Astoria, Oregon, but we assembled in Seattle, Washington, moved down to Bremerton, Washington for a few days training, and then went on to Astoria, Oregon, and that's where we boarded and commissioned the ship, they call it, put it into service. And then we had a 2-day shakedown cruise where we had to go to sea, and I had one heck of a night the first night we were out at sea, because I'd been out before, but these ships sometimes do a lot of waving in the water, and you couldn't walk through the sleeping quarters that night. Everybody was sick and vomiting, and it stunk. And here I was up on the bridge where all good, clean, fresh air was, and I stayed up there.
Learn from the beginning.
So,
Did you get used to that tossing and turning, or
sir.
did you get used to that tossing and turning, or is that something you just never get used to?
Oh, you get used to it, yeah. I was a little ill the first day out at sea with that tanker, and after that I never was ill any longer. But I don't know if you know what the crow's nest is or ever heard of
At
it.
the top.
Up in the top of that big
Super
tall.
Way up there?
No, it's on that tanker over there. There's a,
Oh, I see what you're talking about.
you see a little round
Right there?
place, I can't see
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that's it.
The very top of it. Yeah, I know what you're talking about there.
Yeah. We'd go up there to be on lookout duty. And that was one of my first watches. They call them watches you stand. And
So I don't guess you're afraid of heights, because that's pretty high up
no,
there.
I wasn't, no. We had to climb those Boy, it's surprising how much I've forgotten. What were those called?
Well, now, I wouldn't-
Masts.
yeah.
We'd climb those masts and get up there and stand a 4-hour watch or sometimes a 2-hour watch. Sure was lonesome. But we could look out further and keep a longer lookout to the horizon. It would increase our vision for the ship probably by 30 or 40 miles.
Wow.
We could see another ship that far away. This ship was sunk, the carrier. Now the tanker went through the entire war and never had a scratch on it. The only thing that ever happened, one morning we were going into Port Darwin, Australia, right out of the Philippines, right after the war started. And we were going into a harbor, and the last day out, we were on moving along, and here came a torpedo wake from the stern to the bow. We could see, we could look out, and it felt like it could touch it, but we could see that wake. And we had a zigzag prearranged plan that we put into effect when that took place. So we turned right a considerable amount, and at that time, here went one up the other side, about the same distance. And then we turned back, and here went one across the stern, or fantail we called it. So we had those 3 torpedoes went by us that never touched us.
You outmaneuvered all of them.
And we had aviation gasoline, which is 100 octane. And if we'd been hit, that thing had gone to the moon. Just would have been nothing left.
During the time that he was on the Gamber Bay, he kept a diary, which was against regulations, but that probably wasn't the only thing he did that was against regulations. And he let me read it, and there's one account in there where he saw a torpedo going by. I don't know whether that's your journal over there. Do you have?
Yeah, that's my copy. My daughter has my book. It was a, what do you call it, a 3x5 or a, I had a book with hard backs, and she borrowed that thing about 9 years ago, and I haven't gotten it back yet.
What kind of feeling is that, if you don't mind me asking, when you see a torpedo coming? I mean,
It's not a good feeling, but it's a good feeling to see it out there a little ways so it didn't hit you. And it went on by, and I think they probably traveled maybe a half a mile, and then they run out of fuel from the time they started. They used a lot of their acceleration power, and they just sink.
so if they don't hit anything, they just sink to the
Don't
bottom.
hit anything, they just run out of.
You started to tell us a few minutes ago about the Gamber Bay being sunk, and about how you were able to, how you were fortunate enough not to be on it. Go ahead and finish that story.
Okay. I was sent to a hospital because I was ill, and I had some important things I had to do aboard ship. And I had to work sometimes 20 hours a day. And I managed to grab a little nap, and I was back on duty at up on the bridge where all the
What were your duties on the bridge?
where the brains were. Well, in time of battle and entering and leaving port, my job was at the wheel. That's the steersman. And other times I didn't have to fool with it. We had a whole crew in my division that were, it was called the N Division, which stands for navigation. And we were the closest things the navigator had for an assistant. And my main job then was locating the stars that we was going to use for to shoot to get our fixes.
Wow.
And I'd have to locate about 6 of them. We'd use maybe at least 3, sometimes 4. And what they do is you take a fix and you work on them. Of course, there's time elapsed in between getting one reading and another one.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd have to form a cross. They'd cross them wherever they would meet the lines. And that's where we were. That was our location. And then we had a DR machine, which was dead reckoning, that we would set it every night, and that was one of my duties. And the reason for it was sometimes we'd go a week with no sunshine and stars. Without that, you had nothing celestial that you could use for shooting to get a location. So we'd have to use this DR machine, and that was one of my jobs that I'd inherited, so to speak. The reason for a lot of my duties were that I'm not really tooting my horn, but I was a senior quartermaster aboard ship. We had a chief, which was one rate above me at first, and he got transferred off for some reason, and the navigator didn't want him back. So I stepped up and did his work, which was no problem. And I later, in the Navy, took the exam and passed a test for be rated a chief, because I wasn't sure if I was going to get out or stay in. And I, of course, got out. I decided that I think I'd just gotten married and my wife was pregnant, so I didn't feel like it was my family duty to be away if I didn't have to be.
Well, we never did get you out of the hospital, so let's go back to the hospital. You're in the hospital?
Oh, this is why I missed that ship.
Yeah.
The doctor came around one morning and was checking me out, and he asked me a few questions that I answered. And so he told the pharmacist that was with him, a fellow that assists the doctors, he says, discharge this man today to go back to his ship. Well, the good Lord must have been working in my favor, because this fellow didn't discharge me. The next morning the doctor came around again and said, I thought I told you to discharge this man. And the pharmacist said, I completely forgot it, doctor. He said, I'll take care of it immediately. So he discharged me, and I went back to the dock where my ship was, and it had sailed the day before to go to the Philippine Islands where it was lost. And I had missed it by that one day. And I was waiting at this base where I was for transportation, because they could put you on another ship, send you out there and transfer you over on a boatswain chair. You may have heard of them, but they could transfer you between ships at sea in one of those. And sometimes those were kind of scary, because the waters were rough and you'd go down and touch the water almost.
Now that's a seat on cables run between the two ships, isn't it? You
Yes.
just go across.
You're right.
You know, an interesting thing about the Gamble Bay in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, where it was sunk, it was the only carrier in the World War II that was sunk by naval action. The others were sunk by planes. This one was shot by another ship.
The only carrier.
Oh, I remember that. That's one of the clearest memories of my life. Just like I remember when the president was assassinated. I was in Middlesboro, Kentucky, and my wife to be, Bonnie, was there, and we were sitting around the radio when that news came over, and I don't. That's something that just sticks in your mind from the time you heard it on. I just couldn't believe it. It caused a wave of patriotism to go through the country like it never has been, I think.
You realized immediately when you heard it what it meant, didn't you?
Oh, yes. Yes, I thought this means war. We were into it. Of course, it hadn't been declared, but I knew it was coming.
What had you been doing before that time?
Oh, I was traveling for a tobacco company down in Bowling Green, Kentucky, named Barlow Moore Tobacco Company. At one time, they were in Glasgow, and they had a big fire and burned to the ground, and they moved to Bowling Green and reopened, and I was traveling eastern Kentucky for them selling tobacco.
When did you enter the service?
Well, my wife and I married in February after Pearl Harbor was in December. And I knew that, according to my age, that I would be eligible for the draft most any time. So that summer, that would be the summer of '42, I went with my father to Knoxville, Tennessee, and to the Federal Building, and I took the examination for aviation cadet training. And the exam lasted all morning. Maybe 3 hours, 3 hours and a half. And I thought all along, a lot of things in here I just don't know. So I guessed at a lot of it. But anyway, they told me after lunch that I had passed the written part of the examination, and that I could go, didn't take the physical examination, and it was pretty thorough. But I took that, and apparently passed it all right. And they said, well, come on, get dressed and come on in the room. We've got a little ceremony to go through. So I walked in, and they said, I want you to hold up your right hand, and I did, and take this oath, and I did. And they said, well, we want to inform you that as of right now, you're in the United States Army Air Corps. And I thought that happened before I was quite ready for it.
Yeah.
But they said, now you will go back to your home and await orders. As soon as there is a place available or a class available, you'll be notified. So I went back home and just kept on working, and came in one Saturday night from up in eastern Kentucky, and went to the post office, and there was a notice from the War Department that I had been called to active duty, and I was supposed to report 2 days before that date. So I thought, what a great way to start out my Army service, being AWOL. And I had to go to Columbus, Ohio, and I went that night on the bus, and got there around midnight, I guess. And there were 5 or 6 other fellows that about the same thing had happened to them. So they found us a place to sleep, and the next morning we had some food and spent a day or so there, and then they put us on a train and sent us to Shepherd Field, Texas. So that's the way it all started.
That's where you got your aviation training then?
That was basic training.
Oh, basic
That's what
training,
everybody had to go through, was basic training.
Yeah, that's right.
And they said Shepherd Field, Texas, was a very unusual place, that you could march in mud up to your ankles and be choking to death on a dust storm. It was quite an unusual place, but we managed to get through it.
Well, where did you do your aviation training?
Well, I had to go first to what was called a CTD, it's College Training Detachment. You see, back before Pearl Harbor, in order to have training as aviation cadet, it was necessary that you have a 4-year college education. But they immediately lowered the requirements because they needed pilots and needed them badly. So So they lowered the requirements, and I'd had 1 year of college, so they sent us to a college training detachment. I happened to go to Hayes, Kansas, and they gave us a condensed course that lasted about 5 months, I guess. Just crammed it into us so that we would have a basic knowledge of what you would have if you'd had college education. Then we were called to classification center in San Antonio, and that's where we took tests to qualify whether we would be trained as a pilot or a navigator or a bombardier. And you put your choices down. And I put my choice down as pilot, and fortunately I passed the test and qualified for pilot training. So they sent me then to, the first phase was Pine Bluff, Arkansas. That was called primary. And I stayed there for about 9 weeks. And the unusual thing was, while I was at primary in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, I came in one afternoon from flying, and we were flying Pt.19s, a primary trainer. And I came in and came into my barracks room, and back then we had private rooms. I think 4 of us were in a room. And I came in, and the room was just it was just about dusk. And I turned the light on, and there sat this good-looking young fellow, an officer, and I immediately snapped to and saluted, and he said, "Calm down, Jack, it's just me, Russell Doherty." Russell was up at Stuttgart, Arkansas, and he was an instructor. He'd already had his training, he was an instructor. And he came down to that base and talked to the CEO and said he knew somebody that was in training down there, and he wanted to get him a pass, and he did, got me a pass. And we went down and picked up Bonnie, and he took us out for a steak dinner. I was really thrilled. Now Russell did that for us while I was in training at primary.
Good to see somebody from home.
Oh, it was. It really was. Then after we graduated there, we went on to basic training, which was in Independence, Kansas. And we flew a little single engine plane called a Bt-14. It was made by North American. It was all aluminum, just a great plane to fly. But it had pretty narrow landing gear. You had to be very careful about landing. It was awfully easy to let it veer one way or the other. So it was a little tricky to land, but it just flew like a dream in the air. After we graduated there, before we graduated, my instructor said, "Now Goodman," said, "I'm recommending you for single engine advance." Said, "You just exactly the right size to be a fighter pilot." And I said, "Well, matter of fact, I had my heart set on going to twin engine advance." I said, "I want to fly either B-25 or B-26 or A-20. I said, "Maybe P-38. I said, "One of those twin engine planes I've got my heart set on." Well, he said, "I've never recommended anyone yet to go to twin engine advance." I said, "Well, here's going to be the first one." So I finally talked him into it. And I went to twin engine advanced in Altus, Oklahoma. And we flew a plane then called AT-9, which was built by Curtiss. The only airfield in the United States that had that particular plane, and we really liked it. So I graduated there in 1944, June of 44. And that's when I received a commission and got my wings.
Now, how long had you been in the service at that time? I didn't keep
Well,
counting.
let's
About
see,
2 years?
I hadn't been in hardly a year.
A year, okay.
But it was somewhere approaching a year. It seemed like from the time I'd gone through college training detachment and then primary, basic, and advanced, it was somewhere, I'd say, Jesse, maybe 8 months or so, 8 or 9 months. But I felt like, boy, I really had a lot of Army real quick. I mean, they sort of threw it at you.
Well, my name is James Mason, And I've lived off and on in Glasgow, Kentucky. I came in here in the 70s to run the Tyson Bearing Company in the manufacturing end. I've been in bearing manufacturing quite a number of years. But starting back from the beginning, a lot of things happened. I was born and raised in New York City. And I was educated in the public school systems there. And all of the elementary schools were named PS something or other, and ours was famous PS 82. And they had some very talented and dedicated teachers there. And we got a rather well-rounded education at the elementary level. I graduated at 14 years of age in 1938. And obviously we had a plan for high school. So they asked me to take the examinations for Stuyvesant High School, which was a rather elite school for boys only. And the class regimen was rather different. If you were a freshman and a sophomore, you went to school from noontime until 5:30 at night. And if you were a junior or a senior, you went the morning shift from 7:30 in the morning until noon. No girls, good sports, played basketball, was on the diving team and the swim team, and got a good education while I was there. But early, at the end of my, not the end, yeah, near the end of my senior year, which in 1941, I was going to graduate in June of 1942. My dad and I were thinking, we were batching together because my mother had passed away. And we were thinking about, what do I do after high school? Well, he was a power plant stationary engineer. And there was always an opportunity to go into that profession because I could have got a union job and been an oiler or a fireman and worked my way up into the stationary engineer's job, which was a good paying profession in New York City. And but something caught our eye about the United States Merchant Marine Academy being established. We had the Army Academy and we had the Naval Academy. We didn't have an Air Force Academy in those days, but they established the United States Merchant Marine Academy. And this was to displace the state academies that they had. New York State had an academy. I think it was New Orleans or Mississippi had an academy. California had an academy, and they were called state ships to train people for the Merchant Marine. So we signed in the middle of the year, and we said, well, let's take it. And they said, well, you have to take a test. And you had to be 18. Well, I was only 17 because my birthday was in January 10th. So on the 6th of December, the day before Pearl Harbor, I was sitting in a warehouse on Pier 58, North River, New York, along the Hudson River, taking an examination to get application for the United States Merchant Marine Academy. Came home, got up next morning, went to church, come home, Pearl Harbor. Didn't recognize, like everybody else, where was Pearl Harbor, where was Ford Island, didn't have the slightest idea. Well, we knew where Pearl Harbor was, we knew where Hawaii was, but we didn't know all of the other ramifications. And another thing that happened, and a lot of people didn't realize it, we had quite a Chinese population in New York City. Chinatown was world famous. And those poor Chinese people were going around with signs on their jackets. I am not Japanese, I am Chinese, because they were afraid that they were going to be killed. And this was very prevalent all over. Some of them were getting beaten up. So, went back to school, everything's quiet, all of a sudden we get something in the mail. You have been accepted to the United States Merchant Marine Academy. And my father said, what did I get you into? You know, here's the war going on, and I'm still only 17. 20th of January, I'm 10 days past my birthday, I get the notice, come, you're accepted. The facility that the academy was established on was a magnificent estate in Kings Point, Long Island. This was donated by the Chrysler family. Peter Chrysler owned this magnificent estate, and he gave it to the United States government as the foundation for the land for the academy. And that's where we went. On January 20th, I went to the academy 10 days after my 18th birthday. The war was going on. Of course, the war was declared. And they gave us uniforms, books. We studied basic seamanship, knot tying, rowboating, evacuating ships under distress and everything else. And they had two classes of cadets. That's what we were. We were merchant marine cadets. But there were two classes of them. One were deck cadets, which were going into the officer ranks as mates of the ship and on up into being captains of the ship. And then the other group was engineering cadets, who would serve their apprenticeship aboard ship and work their way up to be third assistant engineers, second, first, and finally chief engineers of ships. And that's the rank that I chose, the engineering task. And so it took all of 20th of January, uniforms, books, basic classes, and on May 7th, January, February, March, April, May 7th, that's how long I was there, I was assigned to go aboard a ship. And each of the ships that we were going to go to took a deck cadet and an engineering cadet, one of each. And this man, who was a deck cadet, and I was the engineering cadet, and there was another pair of men, a deck and an engineering cadet. We had to go down to the pier and be assigned to a ship. We had our gear, luggage, foot lockers, books, uniforms, all the things, paraphernalia that we needed. There are two ships in the harbor. Same company, Moore McCormick. One was a brand new spanking S2, most beautiful ship you've ever seen in your life. Right off the ways, steam turbines, full, everything beautiful. And right next to it was this old scow that was probably built in 1925, old diesel engines in it. I think it was a class of ship that was called the Hog Island. There was a shipyard called the Hog Island, and I think it was one of the Hog Island class ships. Got nowhere fast, but it was stable. We didn't know which ship we were going to get. So we said, well, I guess we have to toss. So the two deck cadets, they had the coin, they flipped the coin, we lost. My buddy and I lost the flip of the coin. They chose this magnificent brand new ship. And he and I got the famous MS Galveston. And this was a motor ship, diesel engine, built in the 20s. And it had a 5-cylinder McIntosh Seymour air injection diesel engine that you could take a step ladder and step down into the cylinder wall. That's how big they were. 5-cylinder. Mm-hmm. And that was the main propulsion engine. And they have diesel engines all over the place, the generators and pumps and so on and so forth. So we thought, well, that's the luck of the draw. The fellows on the brand new ship, I don't know if they ever survived, to tell you the truth, because they got the Murmansk run, going up into the North Atlantic, going to Murmansk, Russia, which was a death trap for the merchant fleets, because the Germans were coming out of Norway with the flights and bombing the devil out of everything. So I don't know if they ever made it or made it back. We never know.
My name is James Trigg Pace. I was born and raised in the southern part of Barren County on a farm down what is now called Allen's Crossroads on the Mathis Mill Road, where it junctions into Brown School Road from 31 East South. I went to a one-room school, and from there I went to high school at Austin Tracy, which was a school at that point halfway between Austin and Tracy, a 3-room high school. There were 13 members in my class. We had 4 boys in our class. All 4 of us went to service in World War II. 3 of us came out as officers. I thought that was right, spoke right well for the class. And from there, I went to Western for 3 years and got my teacher's certificate. I taught a year at Lucas in a 2-room school, and this was in 1941, so in December the 7th, 1941, we found ourselves at war. And at the end of that school term, in January, I went back to Western for another semester, and that semester I took courses that I thought would be beneficial to me in military, perhaps. I took college algebra and trigonometry the same semester, which the algebra was a requirement, prerequisite for the trigonometry, but I got special mission to take them both together. And I took a 5-hour course in radio, which I thought would be helpful to me, and it was to little extent. We learned the dot language a little bit. And during that time there, I took the examination for the Air Corps. And when I took my first examination, I only weighed 125 pounds. The minimum that they would accept you in the Air Corps was 148 for my height. And I asked the sergeant that gave the examination what I needed to do, and he said, eat a pound of steak every day and all the potatoes you can eat, drink 3 quarts of whole milk a day, and eat all the candy bars you can eat. So I did that for a while and put on 25 pounds and got into the Air Corps. I went to primary in Oklahoma. I first went to pre-flight in San Antonio, Texas, primary in Oklahoma, basic in Greenville, Texas, and washed out of flight training as a pilot in Greenville, Texas, and then went to Hondo, Texas, and navigation school, and graduated in December of '43 as a navigator. From there, I had a 10-day leave at home and went to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and met my crew. We were given B-24s, and I guess I finished out the crew for that pilot. I think everybody was already on it except me. And we were there then a week or 10 days, and this crew and a few other crews were transferred to Windover Field, Utah. I was getting further from home all the time, and there we joined our 489th Bomb Group. And we took our combat training there, which included training for the gunners, training for the bombardier, training for the navigator. We made cross-country flights day and night, and finished that. Then we were sent to Kansas. This minute I can't tell you the name of the town, for processing. They did some things to the planes and got our papers in order. And when I say got your papers in order, they prepared you to die. If you did, things would be in order, which is good. From there, we flew to West Palm Beach, Florida. We were briefed in to fly to Trinidad, and our pilots were given a sealed envelope, which they were told not to open until we were out over the Atlantic about an hour. And that envelope told us where we were going eventually. Of course, it was Sunday, and we had gone to church, a little rural church where I was raised, and we had services, I guess, at that point. You might say twice a month. It was a Saturday, have service on Saturday afternoon and Sunday morning. And the preacher would go to have about 4 churches. He'd do that. He'd preach twice on the weekend. And we had gone to church and came home, and I very anxiously went to the little old radio and I probably was hunting a ball game. I'm not sure what I was really hunting, but I found Pearl Harbor had been hit, and that was my first inclination. Now, at this point, I'm teaching school at Lucas, and we get word that the president was going to be addressing the Congress the next day, joint session. So from my school, I left and went up to the little garage there in Lucas to hear where they had a radio. That everybody didn't have a radio back then, and you didn't have them on your cars, and so I went up there to hear President Roosevelt's speech to the day that shall live in infamy.
Before the war, I was in law school, intending to become an attorney. I had graduated and had an AB degree in political science, and then was in law school when the war started. And before that, I had graduated from Trimble County High School and was born and raised on the Ohio River in Trimble County, generally in the location where LG&E has an electric plant now.
Well, what do you remember what you were doing? And I know you do. Tell us what you remember about Pearl Harbor Day.
I was in the library studying when I first heard about Pearl Harbor. I well remember it.
Everybody who was old enough at that time does. I was only 19 months old at the time, so I don't have any memory of that. My corresponding memory would be the Kennedy assassination, I suppose. How soon after that did you enter the service?
I didn't enter the service until 1942. I started college when I was 16 years old. In those days also, you could credit the first year of law school on your AB degree. And then, of course, in 2 more years, you got the, what at those days was known as LLB and what is known now as JD. And I also was an ROTC in ROTC and had qualified for a commission. But at that time, you couldn't accept your commission until you were 21 years old, and I wasn't 21 years old. I became 21 in September of 1941, and I was able to go ahead and take the bar in 1942, and right after I took the bar exam, I went into service as a second lieutenant in the infantry.
Where did you do your basic training?
In one sense of the word, I had no basic training like you normally have, other than through ROTC. Instead of sending me to Fort Benning for the usual basic training, I was sent to Fort Benning to a motor maintenance school, which amazed me no end. I asked them where I reported, if I could get in the JAG department, Judge Advocate General's department, because of course I was a young lawyer by then, and they told me very frankly, flatly, that they didn't need any more damn lawyers, they needed cannon fodder. So they wouldn't put me in the JAG department, and then the adjutant at that particular post I had known in college, and we had disagreed about some college political things, and I think maybe he either thought, I don't know which, that he would do me a favor and send me this motor maintenance school, or that he wouldn't be doing me a favor and would enjoy sending me there. But anyhow, I went to motor maintenance school instead of the basic at Fort Benning.
I was born in Montgomery County in North Carolina.
What
It
year?
was near Troy,
What year was that?
1920, November the 20th, 1920.
What, when did you enter the Marine Corps? I know from past experience that you were in before the war started. When did you enter the Marine Corps?
Yeah, I'd been in 8 months. I was sworn in on April the 7th, 1941. I'd been in 8 months exactly to when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor.
Why did you join the Marine Corps before the war started, did you?
Well, really, I'd worked for a while down at Fort Bragg, and we got laid off down there, and it's right at the time I didn't have a job, so I just thought maybe I'd better go ahead and get in the service and not wait to be drafted.
Mm-hmm. Well, but that time it was already looking like war was coming, didn't it?
Well, it was looking like it was coming. I think some of the National Guard had already been called in at the time I joined.
Where'd you do your basic training?
Paris Island.
That's where most Marines go. Yeah. Where was your first assignment after you finished your training?
Well, after I got out of boot camp, I went to Quantico, Virginia, and went to radio operator school.
One of the things I've always asked folks is, your age is, do they remember where they were the day the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor? Tell us where you were the day the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor.
Well, I was just outside of Pearl Harbor at a Marine camp. It was between Pearl Harbor and Honolulu. And the outfit that I was in had just got to Pearl Harbor on December the 1st. We'd only been there a week.
So you were in a barracks rather than on a ship. Is that right?
I wasn't. I was at a base, at a Marine base. No, I wasn't aboard the ship at the morning of the attack. No.
When did you first realize the attack was underway?
Well, I realized it was a real thing when I saw a plane, some planes that come in flying down the coast, kind of following the coastline down from Honolulu down to Pearl Harbor and Hickam Field, and they started, and they were diving, and there was an anti-aircraft fire. They were being fired on, and I saw one get hit. But some of the boys that were coming from breakfast, I heard them outside our tent there, between the tent rows, and they were talking about seeing anti-aircraft fire, and there was airplanes up there, and said, "Wonder who's having maneuvers this morning." Said, but then I got out there and got to looking myself, and I saw that plane burst into ball of fire, and I knew then that couldn't be maneuvers.
That's a real thing.
That is too real for that. And then a little later on, they got a call from somewhere down there in the harbor that it was the real thing. We were under attack by Japanese carrier-based planes, and they wanted us to stand by to fight brush fires back in the hills back out beyond that the area where our camp was, but there weren't any fires out there, and that needed to be put out. And then we did find out it's a real thing. Everybody went down to the storage tents, and so, because our rifles were still crated up, and we left Guantanamo Bay. That's where I went. That's where I joined the 4th Defense Battalion at Guantanamo Bay, and we crated our rifles up, and they were still crated up the morning of the attack. We weren't going to be staying at Pearl Harbor. We were actually in transit. We were waiting for further transportation. Everybody thought it was Wake Island. It never had been said officially, but that's where we thought we were probably going to wind up. But we went down to the storage tents, and they started breaking those crates open and throwing everybody a rifle and a bandolier of ammunition. Then told us if any planes came around there close enough to fire on, to go ahead and fire on them. And some of the boys, as one plane finally circled around our camp area, but he was too far out of range. They didn't hit him. I don't know what the plane was, what he was really doing, unless it was just an observation plane, maybe taking pictures. But it circled the camp, then flew on off in the direction of Honolulu. And they finally got a 50 caliber machine gun set up down there at the end of one of the tent rows, and there was, somebody was firing that 50 caliber machine gun at the plane, but it didn't any of our fire hit it. It's flying around up there like it was nothing to worry about, and he's the only one in the sky. And he was there right at that particular time, the only one around anywhere around us.
How long did you stay at Pearl in that area after the attack?
I stayed there till the 19th of December. I was there 19 days. And about a week after the attack, is 4 or 5 batteries of the 4th Defense Battalion went aboard ship, and they started to Wake Island. Well, they were en route to Wake when it was captured, when they surrendered, and then that was around the 14th or 15th of December when they left, and then on the 19th of December is another bunch of us out of the 4th Defense left Pearl Harbor, and we went to Midway, and we got on Midway, arrived at Midway on Christmas Eve morning.
That was in 41.
In 41, yeah, Christmas Eve.
And did you stay there until Midway was attacked?
Oh, yeah, I spent 15 months on Midway. I stayed there until April 43. Yeah, I was on Midway when the Battle of Midway.
Right.
When it came up too.
Well, I guess you were glad that they didn't invade. Never did they land any
No,
troops?
they didn't land there, but they were coming with that intention.
That's where they were coming.
They had everything they had. The Jap Navy had coming to Midway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were fortunate that we were able to intercept them and destroy them.
Yeah, I tell you, I felt better that night, the night of the 4th, than I did there on the night of the 3rd.
I can
because
imagine.
they had been sighted. Jap carriers had been sighted on the day before the attack, and we knew what we were going to be in for. In fact, they didn't surprise us at Midway. We'd known for a month or more, I guess, that would be the next place they would attack.
Now, they did bomb the island.
Oh yeah, they bombed us. Yeah, they did. They sure did. And they were fixing to come back for a second attack, and that was when the Navy dive bombers when they caught them there, they were refueling and rearming, and that's when they got them. They got those carriers there, got 4 of them, hit 4 of them there just in a matter of minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, all 4 of their carriers went down.
Yeah, they lost them. Yeah, eventually, I think one of them maybe they finally just scuttled it because they couldn't get it out of there. But they lost those 4 carriers, and every one of them were used in the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Got a little revenge.
And they lost the carriers, and they lost on how many planes, and they lost some of their best trained carrier pilots too.
Yeah, that was it's a turning point of the war in the Pacific.
Yeah, it turned things around for us because you know, those first 6 months there that Japan was running around over anybody they wanted to take any of the other possessions that they'd already taken. All Britain had, the British had Hong Kong, Singapore, and they'd taken what the Dutch had, the Java, and
took what the French
had.
The
French, they lost all. The French lost all they had, all their possessions, and all we had left was the Philippines. And Philippines and Midway.